The main section of our page consists of this big, what's called a hero image, and then contains a list of what are called collections. So there's a snowboard collection, there's a ski collection, there's an accessories collection, and then you have all these projects. So we'll see how much we can tackle in one video. Let's do our hero image first, and this is actually the easiest one because it's just a big image that's 600 pixels high. It uses object fit cover to make sure that the whole thing fits, and then we have this location of this text here, but that's all stuff that we can handle. So we're going to look at our thing that we wrote here. So we have our div with our 2 header rows that's inside of our header. So after our header, we're going to write our main element. So this is where the content of our page is going to be in. And inside of that main, we're going to write our thing, which is called the hero. And the hero section contains 2 elements. It's the image and then the text that appears on top of it. Now, we haven't actually spoken about doing things on top of other things. Most of the time it's next to each other or below each other or in some relationship to each other, but never on top of each other. So this is an interesting one to see, because we don't really use a background image. We're going to use an actual image and see how we can position them. So we're going to write an image. The image is going to be img/ and then it's called hero image. We'll leave the alt tag blank for now. And then we're also going to write a div with the hero __ text. So note that here we write hero in the beginning because it's all part of this hero element, but now this is the text part. And then inside of that we can just write our text, but I found that it's easier to write an h1 and then write the text itself. And maybe in a minute it will be clear why that is. Life without boundaries. Now there's one extra thing that we want to do is we want to give our image itself also a CSS class. So hero __ image, right? So they're all nicely grouped together. So let's see what that gives on our page. So we get our image here, and then of course we get our text below that because that's the normal way that our browser is going to show these elements. So we'll make a hero element here. Hero, and we're going to write .hero, and the main thing that we need to do here is set a height. So we want to fix the height here to 600 pixels. We can also use the view height if we want to, but in this case I just use 600 pixels. And then we want to position our hero image inside of that. And so the trick here, so again I write hero __ image just to refer to this other one. The trick here is to use object fit cover. So that basically means, okay, I give you some space that you can place yourself in, just cover that space. And as you see, it's sort of nicely ignoring the rule that I just gave it. So because this image is way too big, so it's not actually doing what I need it to do. Now I can start mucking about. I can give it a height that's 100%, so it actually fits the height of the element. But then I get into other problems and blah blah blah. So I don't actually want to do it this way. Because I know that also this text has to appear on top of each other. And so whenever I see elements that appear on top of each other, I have to think in terms of position relative and position absolute. And what do they mean? Well, position absolute basically means I want to specify the position of this element on the page. And position relative means I'm going to give you a position, but this position is relative to another position. Now, position relative has a side effect, which means that if we use position absolute inside of it, it's going to position it absolutely to that relative element. And I'll show you what the difference is. So imagine that I want to say position absolute for this hero image. I want to say, well, the top is at 0. What does that mean? Well, it means 0 of this entire page. So it means the top corner here. So if the top is 100 pixels, for example, it's the top here at 100 pixels. If it's 500 pixels, it appears at 500 pixels, right? So it's absolute with regards to this top corner of our page, this corner here. But that's not actually what we want. We want it to be absolute within this container, within this hero element. And that's where position relative comes in. So now going back to top 0, that aligns it to the top of our page. if in our hero element we use position relative, then this has a side effect that now everywhere where we use position absolute is actually going to position that absolute to this element that has position relative set. So in this case, as you can see, it's linking this hero element to this hero image thing. Now there's this white border. Why is that? That's because there's this annoying thing where our H1 already has a margin. It sort of takes up the space. So we'll get rid of the margin just to show you, make it a bit clearer. So we're going to write, so we're running a bit ahead of ourselves, but it's just to make sure that we don't get this annoying thing. So we write hero text H1, margin 0. And so our life without boundaries doesn't have any text. It doesn't appear as well, but we'll fix that in a minute. So our hero image is now at the top of 0 of this specific image, which is exactly where we want it. And note again here, we don't have to use 0. If we use 50 pixels, for example, it means 50 pixels from the start of this other element. And you can see that our text is actually below this image here. This is another side effect, that these position absolute elements will actually appear on top of other elements, as you can see here. We also saw that when our header was all the way here, it sort of obscured all the rest of the images. We want to add some other lines here because we want the width to be 100%. I'm not sure if this is actually needed, but it allows us or make sure that our image sort of fits, and especially if we set the height to 100%, it means, well, it's going to fit in this container that we provide of 600 pixels height, so that it nicely fits in that page here. And you can see as we scroll the page, because we have object fit cover set, it's going to try to fit that image in however it can, which is nice. So our hero text actually consists of 2 parts. And that's because it also has to be positioned relative to this other element, because it has some extra room here at the top. So we also want to use position relative to position it. We could actually use position absolute as well. In this case, it doesn't really matter. But there are some rules that we absolutely have to set. So let's try position absolute for now. Okay, so this works fine for us. But as you'll see in a minute, it gives a problem with the next line, because we don't want it to appear here. We want it to appear in the same grid, so basically the same width as this other elements, right? So it has to align with these other elements. And why does it align? Well, because this is set with a max width, as you remember. So our header row here had a max width of 1180 pixels. And we want to copy this line over to our hero text as well, because that also needs to have this max width. Now, that doesn't work with position absolute, as you can see, but it does work with position relative, so that's why we want to use it here. Or at least I hope that it will. Oh yeah, there's another one that I need to use, and that's this margin 0 auto. So this is the same rule that I used with the other element, and that means that we have these margins to the side here. And now it's a question of making sure that this element is positioned on the right place. The trick here is we're going to set a top value of 400 pixels, so it sort of fits in that image. And then all the rest of the styling is actually going to appear in this hero text H1 element. So here we want this element to have our background. And we're going to use the same background color that we have used here. Actually, Visual Studio Code can give you that. The moment you type hashtag, it's going to give you the list of recently used colors, so that's nice. The color of the text is white, the font size is a bit bigger. It's also uppercase, so text transform uppercase. And we have some basic thing here. Now the H1 by default takes up the entire width of the space because it's a block element, so that takes up all the room. If you don't want that, we can write display inline block, and that basically means, well, just take up as much space as you need instead of all of the space. So now it sort of fits nicely around this box here. And then it's not quite the same. I'm not going to go over the whole thing, The font weight is a bit different, but there's one thing that I think is kind of nice, which is the letter spacing. So we can add some spacing between each individual letter by using letter spacing of 2 pixels, for example. And to make it a bit more extreme, here you can see if we make it bigger, it's going to increase the size of our letters here. So that's sort of nice. It also works better if they're like smaller than the regular letter spacing. So now they're a bit bigger, 2 pixels. And then if we want this box to fit a bit more tightly, we can actually use line height. So the line height is what defines this box here. If we set it to 0.8, it sort of fits this box a bit better. Cool. And we're done. So that's our main element here. We're not going to focus on this element now. Another nice one that I wanted to see, and that's also the reason why I wanted to do this design, is because you have these overlapping elements. So again, before we use these elements that are just regular and we don't really worry about them, but here we have these overlapping elements. So we want to figure out how to make elements that overlap other elements. And that's here for our next section. And our next section is going to be our collection section. So this is our hero element. After our hero, we're going to write our collections. So we're going to write div.collections. And then inside of those collections, let's see here, we have these 3 what are called cards, basically. So these 3 elements. We have snowboard, ski, and accessories. And we have all the images already for that. And they're all very much the same. So I'm going to write one of them and then copy and paste that around. These elements start out as links, as you can see. So the main element that goes around the whole thing is a link. So the link doesn't necessarily have to be text or image, it can also be an entire element. It doesn't go anywhere though, so this hashtag means don't go anywhere. And then we want to give that a class, and the class is going to be collection __ card. So we have a collection card here, and here inside of that card we're going to write the different elements of our collection. So if we look here, what's the first element? Well, it's a header like h2 with the word snowboard inside of it. Then there's this second element, which maybe it's like a div collection, let's call that action. That's view all. Also, while we're at it, we'll give this thing a class collection title. And then the last one, of course, is our image. So we're going to write image. We're also going to give that a class collection __ image. And the source for that image is going to be img/collection snowboard. That's the first one. And then the alt tag, we can also write snowboard. If we save, we see that we have these elements below each other. Going back to our page, we see that we sort of mostly are there. They're already below each other, but they don't really fit in that nice grid here. So to do the styling, I'm actually going to make 3 of them already, so that makes it easier to do the styling here. And it seems like a lot of code, but it's basically just copy and pasting this first element. So the second one is ski. So we are also going to change the collection ski here and then write ski. And then the last one is write accessories. And it's mostly about writing that word correctly. Again, it's probably not your life ambition to make snowboarding websites, so don't worry too much about those details, but it's a nice example in general to show. So we're going to write collections here, our little header that allows us to find it easily in our big document of CSS. And the main way that we're going to style this is using CSS grid with three grid columns next to each other. For me, that's the easiest way to do this. So I'm going to write collections. The background of that element is going to be white, and this will be important in a minute. The max width of that element is 1180 pixels. Remember this value from our hero and also from our header element. And also don't forget that we want to use margin 0 and auto to make sure that we have this automatic margin. So this elements appear in the middle. So you see that this thing aligns here. The other things are not using CSS grid yet, so they don't work yet. So we're going to write display grid to appear in the mini grid, and then here we are going to write, well, what does the grid look like? Well, it has columns, basically has 3 columns. It's always going to be 3 columns, so you don't have to use auto fit or anything like that. And they'll take up 1 fur meaning 1 fractional space, or just 1 free space, so all of the free space. That's much better. So now we have these 3 elements appearing next to each other, and they seem to align, and the rest of it is just basically styling. Now, there's one big thing that I want to do here, and that's to have this overlap. So how do I do this overlap? Well, the main trick is to use a negative margin. So we're going to write a margin top of -50 pixels. And it sort of works in the sense that it does shift up, as you can see. You can actually drag or change this value. You can see that it changes, but you also see that it appears below that outer element. And that has to do with the fact that we used position relative above. Remember that if we use position relative, that element has a fixed position that's appearing on top of the other elements. And so basically now if we want this other element to also appear on top of the other one, we also have to write position relative. In general, position relative doesn't do anything else, but it's sort of nice if we have these layout problems to use position relative to make sure that it appears where we want it to appear. And then it's time to style our cards here. So we write collection card. And so this is one element of these things, right? So how do they appear? Well, it's 3 elements appearing below each other, all centered. So to me, this seems like flexbox with a column direction, a vertical direction. So I'm going to write display flex direction column. I want to align these items to the center. Let's see what that gives. That's already pretty okay. Maybe I want some extra padding on the top and bottom so they don't actually appear all the way there. That's okay. And then the main thing here is I want to make the images a bit smaller. So I'm going to do a collection image. Make the max width 300 pixels here. So they're a bit smaller. And then again, the rest is styling. So our title is uppercase. Has a margin of 0 because otherwise we get these weird margins again. We have a font size of 36 pixels. They're not bold, so we want our font weight to be normal, not bold. And the color of our text is this grayish thing. Okay, so it's a bit better. And then the action, so the link that appears below it. Here it's also uppercase. And the color is going to be the same one as we had before. And then we want some spacing between that link and our snowboard in this case. So we want to do some margin bottom here. Margin bottom, maybe of 30 pixels, something like that. One thing that you see here in this page is that the background is actually a bit different, the color of the background here. And this color is set in our main element, so it's the element that goes around this whole page. It's this element basically. It contains this hero element as well, but because the hero fills up the entire space, it doesn't really matter which background color it has. But for here it matters because it gives some visual contrast. So above our hero we're going to write our main, and I do it here in the same order a little bit than the order that the elements appear here in the HTML, which is sort of a convention here again, a lot of conventions. So here I just write main. I don't have to write dot main because the main is actually a tag that I use, and then I write the background color here to be F7, F7, F7. That's the color that they use, right? So now we have some visual contrast between this background and the images here as well. Maybe one thing that I want to see here is that you have this tiny little line, not sure if you can tell, between these elements. And the way that, and this is why grid is nice, because we can now provide a grid gap, and the grid gap is a space between these elements. So if you make it 5 pixels, for example, it's going to be really wide and invisible, as you can see here, which is not really what we want. Okay, I'll do it another way. I'll put the background here, and now you can see. So now we have our background here. That also means that the background of this element has to be maybe inherited from our parent element, right? So now we have this background image here, and now we can set our grid gap to 1 to actually have this really tiny little border here. So our collections get the background, but most of that background is unused. The cards get a white background, as you can see here, they have this white background, and then the grid gap actually means that we can see the space between these elements, because otherwise we wouldn't actually see this background color. We can also write this F7 thing if we want here, but this inherit basically means that if we ever change this color, this line color will change as well, which is nice. Okay, the next part will be our products section, but I want to do this in a next video. We'll come back to that later. Thanks for watching.